Well, I'm Debbie Avazis. I work for the city of Redwood City in their water conservation program. And one of our programs that we offer is landscape classes, which you all are participating in this evening. And tonight's topic is healthy soils. Appreciate you all being here. Our instructor is Suzanne Bontempo. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah.
And sponsored by Redwood City and Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency. And I had a little difficulty this evening, so Suzanne is doing the slides for me. So all attendees are muted by default. Instructor will pause periodically for questions. So we just discussed that. We're actually going to pause for questions we're going to do the questions at the end. So save those. You could probably put them in the chat too if you had that burning question right then. Would that be okay with you? Put it in the chat and then we'll answer them at the end.
Yeah, the chat might not be enabled, but yeah, either way, if chat works, great. But Q&A also might be the better, so
Oh,
you're not going back and
that's what
forth.
I mean.
Yeah.
Q&A. Sorry.
So,
So we will, answer your questions in two ways, the raised hand or the Q&A moderator. And I'll read the questions and then the webinar will be recorded and will be made available. And they're usually posted in a few days on BOSCA's site. So BOSCA represents 26 agencies that include city water districts, a water company, and a university that purchase water wholesale from the San Francisco Regional Water System. The BOSCA member agencies provide water to 1.8 million people and over 40,000 businesses and community organizations in Alameda County, Santa Clara County, and San Mateo County. BOSCA's goal is high quality supply of water at a fair price. And the program objectives is outdoor water represents the single largest untapped opportunity for water conservation in the BOSCA service area. We've been doing indoor conservation for a really long time. So outdoor is really where we're focused these days. So outdoor water use reduction through the use of water efficient plants and innovative techniques, soil is part of that, can help conserve water and ensure that the future water supply needs for our communities are met. So we help you, the water agencies in BOSCA, by offering programs. One really great program is Lawn Be Gone. So depending upon what water agency you belong to, we have rebates of $1 to $4 per square foot of lawn that's replaced. You just take that lawn out, replace it with drought tolerant plant material, remove your spray irrigation, replace it with drip irrigation, and we will pay you to do that. And then we also have, in coordination with the Water Pollution Prevention Program, rebates for rain barrels. And then the Smart Controller Rebate Program, which is super easy to do. Just log in and it's just an instant rebate. And Ratio is a great controller and uses weather data, so you don't have to guess how much water to put down. It does it for you. And then you have an option to do a an optional rain garden rebate program, and that's in collaboration with the Lawn Be Gone program. And for those of you that are in the Santa Clara Valley area, they do a #1 support sustainable landscapes versus support sustainable landscapes programs. Also take out your lawn, replace it with low water use plants, and they'll pay you to do that, similar to the Lawn Be Gone program. And then they have other information. I apologize, I don't know their programs that well because I'm outside of Santa Clara Valley. So there's several programs. You can go on to their website at South Bay Green Gardening, gardeners.org, and videos and all kinds of good stuff there. And That's it. And we'll go ahead and get started with our presentation. I'll let Suzanne take it away.
The takeaway is that there's a lot of money on the table for you. So take advantage of these rebates because they're really great. Okay, now I'm going to switch the slides. One moment, please. Uh, okay,
Perfect.
we're seeing the right slide.
We are seeing the right slide.
Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am delighted to have this opportunity to talk with you about healthy soils. I am Suzanne Bontempo. I'm the owner of Plant Harmony, where you can get more information at plantharmony.org. And I have been working in the professional garden industry for, gosh, 30 years, a long time. And I have come to understand how important the health of the soil is in relationship to a successful garden, healthy plants, and the overall ecology of that garden. So I'll go through slides for about an hour. I'm going to review what soil is. We'll talk about what is soil. We'll talk about soil life and soil health for a healthy garden, soil health and water, how that's related, how to increase the soil health, soil-friendly practices that we can do to continue to increase the health of the soil. And then we'll talk about soil health beyond the garden. I'm so excited. So, what is soil? I recently read that in a game of 20 questions, soil could be animal, vegetable, and mineral. It is populated by multitudes of very small organisms. It holds the bodies of plant, both dead and alive, and it contains remnants of the original rock from which it originated. According to a textbook, soil is mineral, organic matter, air, and water. The soil may be more subtle feature of the land than the hills and valleys that surround us here in the Bay Area. It plays no less a role in defining the space of which we work, tend, and grow as gardeners. Soil is essential. Soil is an essential living element of the garden and is the foundation of the health of the entire ecology of that garden. Getting to know the soil is essential if we want to grow an abundance of food, a bounty of flowers, or create habitat for wildlife at home. The quality of your soil depends upon the history of land use locally and the extent to which the soil had been manipulated by developers and homeowners. So most of us aren't considering the quality of the soil when we move into a new home. But we then find ourselves having to work with what is there, essentially, working with what we got. But the individual actions that each of us takes, how we dig in the soil, what we put into our soil, can influence the quality and health of the soil. So let's dig in. So, what is soil? Let's look at the components. The components of soil are minerals, organic matter. Organic matter is also another word for it is humus or microbiology, water, and air. Okay. In general, the mineral fraction of soil, the particles usually account for 45% of the total volume of that soil. We're looking at that little graph on the left. The organic matter is about 5% ideally. Okay, that's where we want to go. The remaining 50% of that fraction of soil is pore space or the openings between the soil particles. These pores are filled with various amounts of air and water depending upon precipitation, drainage, evaporation, and transpiration by plants. That 5% of organic matter is really important. 5% is a generous average of good soil. However, most farms in California, the Central Valley, are now at about 1%. They used to be above 10% organic matter. So really really healthy soil can have up to 20% of organic matter, but we don't see that anymore because of how the land has been worked on, or, new developments, things like that. So now let's look at soil structure. In soil, with good structure, the structure is what joins the particles of that soil together, like building blocks or stacked stones without mortar, kind of like a dry laid wall. Good soil structure also includes adequate pore space. Ideal soil aggregates form an irregular framework throughout, which air and water can flow easily and in which plant roots can move freely. This is an ideal situation, and what we gardeners would call dream soil. All right, so soil structure is the assembly of the minerals into aggregates, how they're kind of stacked on top of each other. All right, now soil texture. Soil texture is the combination of particle sizes that we identify our soil as being, such as clay-like or sandy or somewhere in between. So soil texture is the combination of sand, silt, and clay. We can change the soil. We cannot change the soil texture, but we sure can change the soil structure by adding organic matter to the soil to improve its health. Let's look at how soil texture influences that soil structure. We'll expand a little bit on that. So with clay soils, they're super tiny clay particles, for example, that stack up and stick together, creating a mass structure of tiny pore space that allows little passage of air and water or plant roots, which is, if you have worked with clay soil, it might seem impossible to dig or even to get water to soak into it, right? Whereas loose sandy soil, on the other hand, has large particle sizes, more pore spaces, and almost no structure at all. So as a result, water and nutrients pass right through it. Sandy soil dries out quickly, has very little organic matter or nutrients, and plants that are not adapted to those conditions will soon wilt and dry because we would not be able to keep up with the watering, right? This is why organic matter, the humus in the soil, the fungi, the bacteria are so important to help us bind these particles together, creating open spaces for air and water to move through freely and for those roots to grow with ease. So if you're unaware of what your soil texture is, what type of soil you have, you have no idea if it's clay or silt or sand. It's really fun, very easy thing you can do. It's called a soil jar test. It's an easy way to see your soil texture and to see the type of soil you have. So you fill a large enough jar, like a pint-sized jar or a quart-sized jar, about halfway with soil, and then you fill it just about to the top with water. You let it sit for some time, about an hour or so, even longer if you need to. And the longer it sits, the more easily you're going to be able to identify those layers. All the particles are going to settle. Then you'll see the sand settling at the bottom, the silt settling in the middle, and the clay particles settling at the top. It's a fun way to get to know your soil texture. Now let's talk about the soil life, the living organisms in the soil. You might be familiar with the term soil food web. The soil food web is a community of organisms living all or part of their lives in the soil. It describes a complex living system in the soil and how it interacts with the environment, the plants, and the animals. Food webs describe the transfer of energy between species in an ecosystem. The interconnectedness of these organisms is what we are looking to support. The more we can support the system, the healthier our soils are going to be, and the happier our garden is going to be. The microbes. Microbes in the soil are directly tied to the nutrient recycling of the soil food web. Two big players are the bacteria and the fungi. I like to think of the bacteria and the fungi as the, I don't know how to say it. Let's just say the bacteria are a major class of microorganisms that keep the soil healthy and productive. The bacteria performs many important services in the soil, including improving that soil structure and soil aggregate, how the particles stick together. It's kind of like the glue. The recycling also helps with the recycling of soil nutrients and increases water infiltration and also increases the water holding capacity of that soil. So the bacteria really assists with making that soil more like a sponge. Think of a sponge and all those pore spaces in that sponge that can hold that water. Now, the fungi, also important, also an important also important decomposers, play a very important role in building and maintaining the structure of that soil. So fungi binds the soil particles, also assisting with that good soil structure, assisting the particles to kind of stack together, leaving adequate pore space that creates that good structure that we're aiming for. So the other part, this is the other component of creating that sponge, right? So that's where I was getting at. I feel like the bacteria and the fungi are really at the core of making our soil that sponge. I also like to think of them as the bacteria and fungi as the nutrient transport enhancement system. I think it's a funny term. My husband came up with that one day. I loved it. So because these two, this microbiology is going to help break down that organic matter as decomposers. They're going to work to deliver the nutrients to the plants so the plants can absorb those nutrients. They're also working to store nutrients in the soil for sustained availability. They're also breaking down toxins and pollutants in the soil and assisting with holding that soil together. Very important, especially when we get those torrential downpours. We want that soil to stick together and not erode away. Healthy soil for a healthy garden has high levels of organic matter. It's alive. Healthy soil is full of life, containing the fungi, the bacteria, and invertebrates. Healthy soil increases the health of the garden. It assists with good water infiltration. It increases the soil's water holding capacity. That healthy soil is going to filter out toxins and chemicals and pollutants that might be there. It delivers nutrients and water to plants when they need it and where they need it, around the outer edges of their root zone, the outer edges of that drip zone of the plant, where the root hairs are. Healthy soil doesn't require chemical fertilizers or pesticides. In fact, plants will be less prone to pest problems and they will grow, they will be healthier and more resilient resilient to pest problems, resilient to heat, resilient to other weather conditions when the soil is healthy. All right, so this is kind of cool. This might look weird, but I was recently at a Master Gardener event and I saw this great example of how water moves through soil or doesn't. Okay, on the left, on this paper plate, this is flour. It's about a cup of flour. It was just mounded on the plate. And on the right is there are 2 slices of sandwich bread. Okay, just regular sandwich bread. The example on the left, this dry flour, is a great example of how water infiltration is poor. Okay, so that's poor water infiltration. Okay, versus healthy soil, the example on the right, which are the slices of bread. When we slowly poured the water on the flour, it just beaded right off. It did not absorb. I don't know if you can see that in the picture very well. I think so, right? It just kind of got mucky and did not get to the center of that pile of flour. But when we poured the water, the same amount of water on the slices of the bread, it absorbed with ease. There is no water puddling around those slices of bread. It's all absorbed into that bread. So we want water to freely infiltrate, absorb into our soil rather than beating off or running off, not absorbing into the soil. Okay, so we want to avoid that. So, how does this relate to soil or to our gardens? Good soil structure equals good water infiltration. That water is able to absorb into the soil. Okay, water is going to soak into the soil easily instead of washing off, becoming runoff, going into the storm drain, or pooling in areas that the soil is just too dense. It will not allow the water to sink in. Healthy soil holds water like a sponge, making it available to plants for longer. Okay. And in this case, is going to prevent any pooling or flooding or runoff that would be getting into the storm drain. We want to hold on to all that water as much as we can because it just benefits our gardens, the soil, uh, the lower lying aquifers so much better when we can hold on to that soil. All right. How we increase soil health. Well, we increase soil health by adding compost. Compost is organic matter that has been eaten and decomposed by that bacteria, that fungi, the microbes, worms, and other decomposers, all those invertebrates in the soil. When we add compost to the soil, we're improving that structure, making it more adding those pore spaces, making it stick together in all those good ways, making it more like a sponge. We are increasing that water retention in the soil. We're increasing the microbiology in the soil so it can continue to be healthy or develop in a positive way. We're recycling nutrients when we add compost. We're reducing the needs for pesticides when we add that compost because our plants are going to be more resilient and healthier and less inclined to get pests. You're going to hear me say that a couple more times. And when we add the compost, those microbes in that compost, in that organic matter, fight pathogens and bad bacteria in the soil, making that soil even more resilient and robust. It's kind of a win-win. But what is compost? Compost or humus or organic matter is more or less a stable form of digested organic material that can remain in the soil for centuries. It can loosen clay soil or hold together that sandy soil and anything in between. It's going to just make that soil so much better. Compost is organic matter that has been eaten by the bacteria, the fungi, the microbes, the worms, and other decomposers. Nature's way of recycling nutrients and materials. Compost is a final product. It's decomposed organic matter. It's going to not smell stinky. It's not going to have any weird off-gassing smells. It's going to smell like rich forest floor in your hand. You just get a nice whiff of it. It's beautiful. Compost is not soil though, but it's the organic matter that makes up that 5% of the components of a good soil. Okay. So you can think of compost as the organic matter, as the mortar that holds together those building blocks or stacked stones I was talking about earlier, acting as that sticky binding material that really makes that sponge. So one that sticky binding material that might help the soil particles stick together, but also making spaces between them, always leaving those spaces so that the water and the air and the roots can move through. So like a sponge, it keeps its shape when it's dry or when it's holding water. It doesn't change. by increasing the organic matter or adding that compost to our soil, roughly 5%, the soil water holding capacity quadruples. Okay, this is really important here in California where we have summer dry weather. And right now it's the end of a long dry summer. And if we have healthy soil, those plants, we will not need to water the soil as often because that water is staying in there for a longer period of time, but in a way that is healthy because it's mixed with those air pockets. So there's no roots are rotting. They're just able to stay nicely hydrated for a longer period of time. All right. So let's talk about preparing the soil for a healthy season of growing. All right. So when I say, okay, great, I understand what the compost is. I understand we're going to increase the health of the soil by adding that compost, but now what do I do with that compost? We are going to amend the soil in our garden with compost, or we're going to amend the soil in our container plants, even the containers that our house plants grow in. We're always going to add compost to the soil. So we're going to add compost when we're planting new plants by mixing soil in. We dig that hole. We're going to mix the compost in that hole about 50-50 by into that existing soil, and any of the soil that we're backfilling into that planting hole. We're going to be mixing 50-50. Okay, that's how we get it in the soil at time of planting. If we have plants already established in the ground, we can top dress with the compost around the drip line of the plants, that outer edge of the plants where that root zone kind of goes around. We can also put it under the mulch layer to really protect it so it can work into that soil. We're going to do a similar thing with our houseplants, but instead of covering the entire top of that houseplant or the container, let's say outdoor patio containers with plants in it, we're just going to maybe work in like maybe a couple tablespoons or maybe up to a cup of compost, just working it into that top inch of soil around the plants and around the inside seam of that pot, the lip of the pot. We can also apply compost as a tea around the root zone. This is something that I would investigate, look into online. I know you can buy compost tea at Linkso in San Carlos and maybe some other landscape supplies. But if we're making it at home, it's very important that we are following the proper instructions because that compost tea does need to be aerated. It's very important that air is getting bubbled through the water to really keep the microbiology alive and healthy. So keep in mind that annual flowers and annual vegetables and just any other edible food crops need more compost. So we're going to look at anything that gives, just think anything that gives you food or anything that gives me food, I want to feed a little bit more often. And I want to make sure I'm adding compost to the soil around these plants and also at time of planting. And then of course, any annual flower plants, we're going to add whenever we're replacing those annuals. Perennials, trees and shrubs can be top dressed with compost a few times a year. And that would go for any perennial trees and shrubs that are food crops as well. We're just going to top dress with compost a few times a year. Maybe in the very late winter, early spring, maybe the early summer, and then again around now as we move into fall. Those are perfect. And then always top dressing with a nice protective layer of mulch is very helpful. Making compost. You know, you can make compost at home. It's relatively easy. It's doesn't take a lot of time. I myself am a master composter for San Mateo County. I know that there's a lot of resources and classes around the communities where you can look to see if they're teaching composting classes. I'm sure there's something that's local. I know that San Francisco's Garden for the Environment teaches composting classes every month. So if you're ever wanting to take a drive up to the city, but I can share that I do know that there are many resources of classes around San Mateo County for sure. But it's a really easy way to recycle your yard waste and get it back into your soil. Okay. Keeping in mind, it's really important that we're only working with yard waste in our outdoor garden compost systems. Okay. We want to avoid attracting rodents and other wildlife critters. They can be quite destructive. But there's many resources and classes and wonderful books that you can find even at the library. My favorite book is the Rodale's Book of Composting that I absolutely know the library has because I've checked it out at that library there. So check that out, Rodale's Book of Composting. It's very user-friendly, very easy to read. And I've had my copy now for at least 20 years, still relevant, still very helpful, and I reference it on a regular basis, believe it or not. But we can also buy compost. We can buy it in bags from a local garden center. We can also buy it in bulk from a local landscape supply. And a couple things to keep in mind. When we buy bags, it's often called planting mix or garden amendment or soil amendment or garden compost. Sometimes it has some fancy name, soil builder, um, bumper crop. Okay. So those are all going to be compost. Those are all designed to be mixed into the existing soil at time of planting 50-50 or top dressing, as I mentioned. The bags are going to contain organic matter that add those nutrients, break apart soil, and improve the drainage. Okay, it's going to be the compost we're looking for. A fresh bag of planting mix or soil amendment. When repotting, add a fresh bag. Add fresh planting mix or soil amendment when we are replanting areas or when we're adding vegetables and getting those vegetable beds prepared, or if we want to do that top dressing around the drip line of our fruit trees, of our ornamental trees and shrubs and so forth. And bags are ideal for gardeners with limited access to space, like if you have to walk down a narrow side of the house or through the breezeway or through the garage to get to the backyard. It's much easier to carry a bag, all right? Or bags are really ideal for smaller planted areas. Like if you only have a couple of pots, maybe you just really need a bag or two. Keep in mind that the bags can cost more. So, we have to just offset what is more convenient. I have found that in some cases, it doesn't matter what the cost is. The bag was the only way I could get it to the backyard. Maybe you have to go through the house. And just a reminder that potting soil is for pots. This is not going to be compost. This is not for general gardening or amending the soil. So just keep that in mind. Potting soil is for pots. And yes, you can top dress with potting soil for your containers if you want to, but it is not compost and we're not amending the soil with it. All right. So bulk compost. Bulk compost, like we can get a truckload, we can get it delivered. It's definitely going to be more economical, especially for larger projects, okay? We will need a way, though, you will need a way to move that bulk compost into the garden area, such as shovels and maybe wheelbarrows, because you'll need to move it if it's in the backyard. If it's in the front yard, it'll be pretty close, so that will be less effort. But keep in mind that most cities require that you have to move the bulk material, be it compost or soil or mulch, off the street or driveway within a very short amount of time. Usually it's that day, but you want to look into that and see what the guidelines are. Definitely want to make sure it is moved before a rain event, a strong wind event. And if a rain or wind event does occur and you haven't been able to move all the material, you want to tarp it really well. We want to avoid any of that material blowing into the street and clogging the storm drain. You also don't want your material that you just purchased to leave. You want to keep it on site, right? So just keep that in mind. There's also the municipal compost giveaways that are free, but you have to go pick it up. So you have to be prepared to bring bags or buckets or something, and usually your own shovel. And that's another great way to get compost to your garden, but you have to actually go get it and pick it up and so forth. So a lot of options, a lot of options. All right, let's look at soil-friendly practices. Ways to keep our soil healthy. Well, first we want to, when we need to feed our plants, we want to feed them with organic fertilizers. So what is organic fertilizer? Well, it's derived from organic matter, such as mushrooms or manure, compost will be included in that. Uh, Kelp, blood meal, bone meal, cottonseed meal, alfalfa meal. It's typically going to be ingredients that when we read that box or bag, we can identify. We know what those things are. We recognize those words. Okay, that's really important. Organic fertilizers are going to contain micronutrients. So those micronutrients are going to be really important. So these are going to be more complete foods for the soil and for our plants. You'll notice that organic fertilizers often have lower NPK numbers. That's the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. So instead of seeing like 16, 16, 16, we're going to see things like 444 or 462 or, very low numbers. Okay. This is going to be a more sustainable way to feed the plants. In fact, we're actually feeding the microbiology in the soil. We're feeding that all those microbes in the soil, all that organic matter that we're adding to the soil. It's hungry. It wants to be decomposing something. So when we feed our soil with organic fertilizers, we're actually feeding the microbiology, which then has a relationship with the plant's roots to slowly deliver the nutrients to your plants on an as-need basis. It's this beautiful symbiotic relationship that the microbes will directly feed and provide that plant's root zone with the very minerals and micronutrients that that plant needs. It's kind of amazing. We want to use organic fertilizers instead of synthetics for several reasons, but a couple. Synthetic fertilizers are made from petroleum and fossil fuels, and they're high in salts. Okay. In many cases that I see working with the public, the average person is not watering deeply or thoroughly enough. And when they're using these synthetic fertilizers, maybe sometimes a little bit more often than needed, but they start to see salt buildup within the top couple inches of the soil because these fertilizers aren't getting flushed through well enough. But over time, this salt buildup stresses the plant, and then we can see a deterioration of the plant. It's actually shortening the lifespan of that plant. Also, salts are detrimental to the soil's health. So those are really my takeaways why we want to avoid synthetics. Something else to keep in mind is that when we feed with organics, if we're transitioning from a synthetic garden to feeding organically, we will need to feed a little bit more often at the beginning, but when we feed with organics, we're just not fertilizing or feeding as often. So if we feed with synthetic fertilizers, we have to follow that fertilizer schedule that's on that bag or bottle. If it says to reapply every 4 weeks, then we need to reapply every 4 weeks exactly the amount the bag or bottle says. If we happen to be on vacation or we are at a party or where it's too hot and we don't want to go outside, if we don't fertilize, that plant is now starving, wanting more food. So it's something to keep in mind. Synthetic fertilizers might seem like they're less expensive at that moment, but we have to feed more often. So they actually end up being more expensive and there's more risk of stressing your plants out. So we always want to practice feeding with organic fertilizers. It's less expensive over time and it's a more holistic, sustainable way to feed our plants and increase the health of that soil. Okay, worm castings. So what are worm castings? Worm castings are an organic form of fertilizer produced from worms. Worm castings are also known as vermicasts, worm casting manure, or really just worm poop. Okay. So as these worms, as these creatures eat through compost, their waste creates an optimum soil enricher. Worm castings kind of resemble, if you have a little microscope up close, a football-shaped particle that improves soil aeration and drainage. Okay, so it's also increasing with that water retention in the soil. So it's doing a lot of the similar things that compost does. But I like to think of worm castings as a superfood for the soil because it contains an abundance of nutrients and minerals essential for the plants to thrive. It also contains important enzymes, beneficial bacteria, and humus derived which provides a dynamic root growth and plant structure. It is highly effective for preventing insect pests and inhibiting diseases while neutralizing the high pH. I add a tablespoon of earthworm castings to all of my roses at time of fertilizing, to my houseplants. I'm always putting about 1/4 cup in my raised beds when I'm prepping for planting vegetable plants. Any new season, I'm mixing it around the drip line with my fruit trees. I mean, this really is a superfood. Okay, you can make them, you can buy them, very easy, but it's one of the best things you can do, in addition to adding that compost and feeding with organics. All right, so this is a really cool illustration of everything, of kind of what I've been talking about thus far about organics and synthetic fertilizers. This is an illustration of how the plants access the nutrients. Okay, so the illustration here on the left shows organic fertilizers integrating into the soil, feeding the microbiology, which then takes the nutrients, that makes those nutrients readily available for the plants. Okay, so there's that symbiotic relationship that I was talking about. But on the right shows how synthetic fertilizers bypass that soil, directly feeding the plant roots. The plants become dependent on that chemical fertilizer. There is no biology there that's supporting that root zone. It's just a planting medium that's supporting the roots, making the plant not fall over. Synthetic fertilizers don't support the health of the soil and can cause plant stress, as I mentioned a moment ago. All right. We also want to protect the soil with mulch. Mulch is a protective layer of organic wood, chips, bark, or leaf material laid on the surface of the soil. The reason why mulch is so important is that dry soil is hydrophobic. Let's think about that little pile of flour a couple slides back where we poured the water on it. That water just beaded right off. It did not absorb at all. That's what happens to our soil in our garden when it's dry. If you add water too quickly, it can run off. So when we add a layer of mulch, usually 2 to 3 inches, it protects that soil and aids with water infiltration. It prevents that crust from getting created. It allows that water to actually absorb into the soil. Mulch reduces water evaporation significantly. So when we're watering our plants, especially in the summertime when it's hot and dry, we want to reduce that water evaporation. We want to keep that water in the soil for as long as possible. Okay, so that's what a 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch does. It is going to cut our water usage by roughly 20% and upwards of 70%. Okay, so we always want to check the soil to make sure the soil is dry before we water. If we are in that, oh my gosh, it's really hot today, I think I need to water. If we've got the 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch on top, let's get our fingers in that soil to make sure the soil is dried out, because I can tell you, mulch is this magic blanket that is going to hold the water in for longer. Mulch also regulates the soil temperatures. It's going to lower soil temperatures about During the summertime, it's going to lower the temperatures 4 inches down. That the soil temperatures are going to be 10 degrees cooler than the air temperatures during the summertime. Or in the winter, the soil temperatures are going to be about 10 degrees warmer 4 inches down than those cool temperatures that we feel. All right, so many benefits to adding mulch to the soil. The takeaway here is just do not bring it up around the base of the plant. We want to make sure that base or the crown of the plant is always free from mulch and that there's no mulch up against plant stems or anything, because we can actually cause root rot or rotting to those plant parts. Sheet mulching is another really great way to condition the soil. Sheet mulching, sometimes called lasagna mulching, is a process of revitalizing an area of the garden with poor soil, creating a new garden bed or planting zone over an area of grass by laying out sheets of organic matter. The process serves several functions. It suppresses grass and weeds. It adds a lot of organic matter all at once, and it serves to hold more water. Over time, it will break up that compacted soil underneath. It will save you time and money, fossil fuels, by reducing the amount of lawn you have, or maybe areas of weeds that you're just so tired of like dealing with. It is just really amazing. You simply leave those weeds in place, or you leave that lawn in place, and we are going to lay out layers of cardboard or newspaper overlapped. Of course, we're using newspaper that is has soy-based inks only, not those glossy ads that are like in the, mailers or in the middle of that newspaper. But we're going to put multiple layers of newspaper or cardboard overlapped, lay it out, and we're going to top it with no less than 3 inches of mulch, or a combination of mulch and compost. And then we're going to leave it there. We're just going to let it sit there over a period of time, and about 6 to 9 months, that soil underneath becomes rich and alive and ideal for planting. If we want to keep that area weed free for a longer period of time, if the reason why we're sheet mulching is to prevent weeds, we will have to replenish that 3 inches of mulch seasonally. Okay, so just keep that in mind. It will need to get replenished. Cover crops are another wonderful way to keep that soil healthy during times between planting seasons. This is, I feel like, a very underutilized, really economical, super user-friendly way to build the soil health during times of, if we're in between planting our food crops. Let's say we're done with our summer food crops, but we're not planting winter food crops, then let's plant some cover crops. Or if it's an area of the garden that's just been bare and kind of crummy and nothing grows there, let's get some cover crops in there so it can really start to condition that soil and bring it alive. Cover crops are great for unused veggie beds or sections of the garden that we're just not planting. It helps protect the soil from damage and erosion. Again, it helps hold that soil together when we have significant rain and weather events. It continues to feed the microbiology in the soil. And it replenishes nitrogen in the soil. It is capturing nitrogen from the air and getting it down into the roots. And when we cut those cover crops at the base, the nitrogen is there for the next plants we want to grow. So maybe we're putting the cover crops in now, and I'm going to plant my tomatoes next, late spring, early summer. There's going to be nitrogen for my tomato plants already in the soil because of this work I've done. Cover crops also attract beneficial insects and provide flowers for pollinators during times when sometimes there's not a lot of flowers out there for our pollinators to forage. Cover crops improve the soil structure and the water holding capacity. My most favorite cover crop to plant are fava beans. They're very easy, very accessible. You can get them just about at any store that sells packets of seeds. You can get them in bulk at your farm supply. You can also order them online. It's a perfect time to add fava beans to your garden right now. We are in the fall. We still have warm days, but shorter daylight hours, and our evenings are starting to cool down. Okay, so get those fava beans in, but we simply, as they grow, we're going to let them just, we can harvest the little fava bean tips and saute them with some sesame oil and garlic. It's delicious. But if we're growing it as a cover crop, right when they start to flower in the spring, we're going to cut it at the base and let those root zones stay in that soil so that the next thing we're planting can access all the beautiful nitrogen we just added to that soil. All right, soil health for a healthy garden. Soil health for a healthy garden. We want to plant trees, shrubs, and perennials. I was recently working with a beekeeper association, and their mantra is plant, plant, plant. We cannot plant enough. We want to have a beautiful, diverse assortment of plants, okay? All shapes and sizes, all colors, and so forth. We want trees, shrubs, and perennials because it benefits not only the organisms above the ground, but all the organisms below the ground. We want living roots in the soil. When we have living roots in the soil, it feeds the soil organisms and holds the soil into place throughout the year. Plants protect the soil from heavy rain and wind. Plants make shade for the soil to reduce evaporation and reduce weed germination. When we have plants, they actually outcompete the weeds, so we see less weeds. Plants are going to provide a variety of plants, a diversity of plants will provide food for the birds and the beneficial bugs throughout the year. This is all really important to keep our gardens healthy and happy and have a nice balanced ecosystem. We always want to plant the right plant in the right place. So it's super important that we are doing our homework before we add new plants to our garden, okay? We want to make sure that the plants that we're bringing into the garden are going to adapt well to the conditions of the garden and thrive as it grows. It's really important, and a very common mistake most people make is we're at the garden center and the plant is only so big or so small, and we don't always read that tag very well or very closely. And we want to make sure that the mature size of the plant is going to fit into the space we have. We want to make sure it fits without being overcrowded. And this is really important because most plants don't welcome regular pruning and would rather be left alone, okay? Unless it's a boxwood or a privet, it really just wants occasional seasonal pruning or deadheading, and then that's it. It doesn't want to be constantly pruned back. So very important to keep that in mind when we're adding new plants to the garden. We always want to choose climate appropriate plants. Here in California, we live in a Mediterranean climate, which is a climate that receives winter precipitation and is dry throughout the summer months. And from what I recently learned, we live in the driest of the Mediterranean climates. So just keep that in mind. I mean, in our summer, that sun is hot. We choose California natives, and we can also choose Mediterranean natives that are going to adapt to our summer dry climate and the conditions of our garden. We all live in very unique microclimates throughout the Bay Area, so we always want to make sure that those plants are going to adapt to even our own garden. We match the plants to the condition of the garden to keep them from being stressed and susceptible to pest problems. That's the main reason. We also want to support the biodiversity above the ground. When we add new plants to our garden, consider plants that support the complex food webs that surround us. Plant diversity, different shapes and sizes of flowers, different colors, different sizes. California native plants provide the most benefit to these ecosystems. But, like I said, we can also take advantage of some of the really good Mediterranean native plants, but we want to favor California natives whenever possible. We want to keep in mind that when we're adding plants to the garden, trees, shrubs, and perennials, that these are going to provide nesting areas and shelter for wildlife to raise their young. We also want to look at plants that provide food during different phases of that plant's life cycle. So be it berries or seeds or even different parts of the plant that can be used for nesting material. Plants that bloom at different times of the year will provide food for the wildlife around, our birds, our bees, our little fence lizards, and so forth. And during the heat of the summer, it's really nice to provide a water source for the birds and the pollinators. A shallow glazed saucer, does not have to be big, but a shallow glazed saucer filled with some stones and then filled up with water. The stones are going to be there to prevent our bugs, our pollinators from drowning. It's ideal. This water will evaporate by the end of the day. In fact, I usually have to fill mine a couple times a day on these really hot days. So there's no risk of breeding mosquitoes, okay? This is just there to provide a very nice service for our pollinators and for our birds. And then really the last thing to consider is we want to increase our permeable surfaces. We want to choose things like decomposed granite without the hardening agent. We want to consider mulch or pea gravel or dry laid pavers instead of concrete or asphalt, because we want to allow that water to infiltrate down into the soil below. Okay. The soil doesn't stop at the path's edge, and the root zones don't stop at the path's edge. Okay. So we really want to support that healthy soil structure by allowing that water to infiltrate even under our paths that we have throughout our garden. Hopefully now we understand the connection of healthy soil in our gardens. Healthy soil means we are growing healthy plants, that we have greater water holding capacity with less runoff or flooding, and our plants will be more resilient to pest issues overall, seeing less pests in the garden, and just having more success and bounty with less work from us. Okay. Get to really sit back and enjoy. But beyond the garden, healthy soil is a climate solution. Okay. So through the process of photosynthesis, plants pull carbon out of the air. They feed that carbon to the fungi and bacteria in the soil in exchange for the nutrients. This process pulls carbon out of the air and stores it in the soil, in the bodies of these organisms. As previously said, compost helps increase the microbiology activity in the soil, therefore increasing that draw down capacity of carbon. Compost acts as both a filter and a sponge in the soil. Compost can hold 5 times its weight in water, really, acting as that sponge. So that's why it's so important. This ability to hold that water helps plants and the microbes during times of drought and flooding. So either end of that spectrum, it is helping, okay? This healthy soil and compost is going to act as a filter for stormwater pollutants, immobilizing and degrading pollutants, improving water quality. And when added to soil, compost can filter out urban stormwater pollutants by an astonishing 60 to 95% of those toxins. It's like a Brita filter made of carbon, okay? So with more carbon in the soil, water filters through it will be cleaner by the time it reaches the aquifers. It's a simple solution with a big impact. So I just want to thank you for joining me, for joining us. I hope that you're inspired to get some compost into that soil and, just make your whole gardening experience so much easier. We're going to be using less water. We're going to be using no pesticides. We're going to be fertilizing with organics. We won't need to fertilize as often, and we're going to recycle all those great nutrients. So I'm Suzanne Bontempo. You can find me at plantharmony.org. You can follow me on Instagram at plantharmony, and you can email me with any questions that might come up later. I'm Suzanne at plantharmony.org. And with that, let's finish with your questions.
Anybody questions?
I know everyone's like, that was a lot. I always bring a lot to my programs. It takes a minute.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
So I do water audits. I go out into the community and, just go over people's irrigation systems and, make recommendations and things like that. And every once in a while, I'll come across like where you have like a hard pan. There's been a lot of runoff there and the soil's very compacted and it has like this hard pan on top. How long, well, first of all, do you have to actually disturb that soil and add the compost? Or can you just add it to the top? And then how long does it take to resolve?
Yeah, that's a good question. So typically, and this is something I it was an afterthought. I meant to add it. We typically are not tilling. So if you notice, I said a lot of top dressing or just working at time of planting. But if it's a really crummy area that hasn't been worked, that is, I mean, there are some areas where there is that hard pan that is just the nature of the area. Like I know sections of Napa, it's like 9 inches of soil, and then you get into this layer that you cannot really penetrate. But I recommend tilling but I don't mean like with a rototiller. I'm talking about with a shovel and or a fork. Like we're going to dig down and we're actually going to turn and break up that soil and turn in, a good 6 inches of compost. We really want to try to get it like that 50-50. And your shovel or your fork, when you have, if you've got like a good 4 to 6 inches of compost on the soil and we dig down to turn it over, like we're making bread or, cookie dough, we're turning in the ingredients, we're now able to get down 12 inches because of the fork or the shovel. That's just what we're able to dig in. And then we're kind of breaking up those clods with that shovel or that fork. From there, I would, regularly be adding compost for years. I mean, I've heard people say that they had the worst clay when they moved in and they've been working and adding compost every spring and fall, either top dressing or working in at time of planting, and their soil is just really beautiful. The other thing is if it's a super crummy area, and I've had friends where they've bought a house or moved into a new house and the garden or the backyard was just like no one took care of it for years. It was kind of just dead or just a lot of weeds and the soil just had no life. You sheet mulch that area and you sheet mulch it for a good 18 months. And then when you're ready to get out there and plant, that soil is just full of life and conditioned and ready to go. So those are the two ways I've handled crummy soil for clients over the years in the East Bay, South Bay, San Francisco area, Marin. I mean, I've kind of worked at some point gardens all around the greater Bay Area. And that's how we've always kind of navigated it. I mean, sometimes you even have to get the pickaxe out. So, but over time, when you're adding that organic matter, the soil responds, the life appears, and then the microbiology is doing the work for you.
Great. Well, we do have a couple of questions. The first one says, I don't rake up the leaves that fall from my shrubs. Does leaving them alone have the same effect as top dressing?
Oh, beautiful. Leave the leaves. Okay, that is a really wonderful campaign. It's a fall campaign that the Xerces Society and other pollinator partnerships have. You'll start to see these campaigns in these. But when we leave the leaves, that's Mother Nature's mulch. That's free mulch. We just want to make sure we are removing any leaf debris from the crown of the plant, the crotch of the plant, or where the stems kind of branch out. We want to make sure that area is clean and clear, but leave all those leaves. We are not only providing that plant with nutrients that's coming from that plant, but we're also providing habitat for overwintering beneficial organisms, beneficial insects. Butterfly chrysalis will be in there. Beetles will be hiding out. Native bees are going to be in those cavities. So it is a win-win for everyone involved. It's a win-win. And it's the act, I like to say, we get to practice our lazy gardening practices. Being a lazy gardener means leaving the leaves. Of course, we don't want the leaves on patios or anywhere we might slip and fall if it gets wet. So we'll sweep those away, but leave the leaves throughout the garden. Absolutely, yes, bravo.
Question. You said to bring it away from the plant just a little bit. Is that because you can get rot? That
Yeah,
gets
so
wet, it can rot out the crown of the plant or
yeah.
in the crotch or whatever in between the
Yeah, the
branches.
very base. We always just want to like a couple inches around. Wind will blow leaf debris there and such, but it's always nice just to remove that leaf debris or any soil that's kind of settled at the base. We just want to make sure that has nice airflow, but then all around the plant has a beautiful layer of mulch.
Great. Okay, one more question. What are the best resources to identify the health and guide the return of plants to proper health through digital channels with submitted photos?
That's a real tough one. I'm not a fan of some of those apps. I've used them because everybody uses them, but I find there's so many limitations. I would recommend going to your local extension office, your UC extension office, um, where the master gardeners have their hub. We're going to get one of our state advisors, that works through the UC system that's going to be there, who's has gone to school and understands and can identify these pathogens and problems. Um, maybe a more knowledgeable master gardener also might be there to help. But keep in mind, when we take samples to the extension office, we are getting the professional advice that we are looking for. If it's a insect, one of my favorites online resources is bugguide.net. You take a photo. I believe they're through University of Iowa. So it is a university app or resource. And you sign up and you send the photo of this mystery insect this mystery bug, and they give you proper identification with the species name. Uh, every time I've done it, it's been within 30 minutes. So must be someone there just working that line 24/7, like in shifts. But I'm very impressed. I don't get that kind of exact information from any of the other apps. Okay. So, and then that's why, I work really closely with UCIPM. That's why I offer my email address. I'm always happy to help, but really reaching out to your local extension is going to be the key. That's going to be the best resource that you can utilize.
Do you know the location of the extensions in San Mateo County?
I don't remember. You'd have to look it up. I'm so sorry.
Oh,
It's
no
been so
problem. I
long.
thought
I
there was
know,
one in Half Moon Bay, but I could
yeah,
be
because they share with San Francisco, but then I thought that their offices were not far from just north of downtown San Mateo. But again, we'd have to look that up, and I'm so sorry.
no problem. Just thought I'd ask. Okay, another question. Is there any benefit to testing the chemistry, such as pH, of soils.
It is important to test your soil. So if it's the first time you're new to this garden, or you're just you're taking this class because you're like, man, I just feel like something's funky with my soil. My plants aren't really growing well. I'm just really discouraged. Absolutely get your soil tested. There are soil testing labs in the area. You'll have to do an online search. I know there was one that was in Santa Clara. Uh, I think it was called Wayview or something. It's changed its name a couple of times. If you are at a loss, you can go to the Master Gardener's website or go to Linkso and ask. Those two resources will get you where you want to go. Follow the directions on how to take a soil sample and get your soil tested, and then you will get a report. It is important to also get the pH tested because the pH affects how plants access the nutrients. So if the pH is too high, if it's too alkaline, the plants are not able to take up nutrients anymore. So those nutrients are just sitting there waiting for the conditions to be right so that the plant can actually utilize them. However, when we are adding compost to the soil and we are, adding earthworm castings to the soil, the microbiology naturally balances and neutralizes the pH to accommodate what that plant wants. So, with that said, it is important to get your soil tested so you know what you're up against. There's going to be a lot of, there could be minerals that your soil has too much of or not enough of, and that's just nice to know so we can correct it organically. But then from there, just being aware. You can get those little like pH kits and soil testing kits from like the hardware store or local garden center, but there's limitations to those. Okay, so keep that in mind. Just keep that in mind. It'll be a ballpark. It's not going to be scientific.
I was going to ask about that, so I'm glad you addressed it. And we do have another question, but I think you already answered this. Where's the closest UC Extension office to Redwood City?
Yeah. We can do a Google search, but I would just look it up online. I haven't been down in the peninsula for about 12 years, so I don't remember. I work with the Napa and the Marin one. I'm all the time. That's where I'm always at. So it's almost like out of sight, out of mind. But I've been there before. So
What about like the local farm bureau or something like that? I know that's probably not a lot of those in the Bay Area, but I know there's one in Napa Bay.
well, I think they're similar. Okay, I hit the wrong thing. So hmm. It says, yeah, it's in Half Moon Bay. That's exactly right. On uh Persima Creek Road.
Prisma Creek Road.
Persima, yeah,
Oh, oh,
1500.
it's probably Elkus Ranch. Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. It says UC Cooperative Extension for San Mateo, San Francisco counties.
Oh, okay.
I
Thank
think they
you.
had an
Thank you,
office.
Andrew.
Yeah, I thought they had also an office over on the other side, just north of downtown, because I've met in that building. Maybe it's just like another building they use. But anyway, that's the official
Yeah.
location. So not so easy to get to.
No,
Sometimes not so easy to get to if you're on the other side.
but you might want to call or email. I bet you if you
Mhm.
email pictures or something like that, they might be able to. to help you out, or maybe they have someone that they could recommend that you can see on
Yeah,
the side of the hill, because I know that's a bit of a drive.
it is.
I do it daily, but
Um,
no,
I
that
know that it's also really important because we have brought in new pathogens that and it's fun. I mean, like I say, it's fun, but when we want to all know about the UC extension, the UC cooperative extension wants to know if there's a new pathogen in the area or a new pest in the area, like insect pest or something. Like it's just really helpful to also reach out because it's new things come into the area.
right,
So.
right. So that was really nice. Andrew looked it up. It's 1500 Prisma Creek Road, Half Moon Bay. Phone number is 650-726-9059. And it is CE San Mateo at ucanr.edu. I don't know if anybody wanted to write that down, but thank you for that, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Any more questions? I found it to be really interesting. I did know some of your presentation just from taking irrigation classes and
Hmm.
landscape classes over the years, but it was great.
Thank you.
It was some of it was just a great reminder for me. So, oh, we
Yes.
have one more.
Oh, good.
Yay, thank you. Um, oh, two. The Master Gardeners are available on Tuesdays in Redwood City at the Veterans Memorial Center at Red Morton. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's
nice.
awesome.
Nice. Yeah,
Okay.
the master gardeners are a great resource. I work really closely with several of them, so many counties, and and yeah, I mean we want to utilize that resource. So, and like I said, if it's a really tough question or like something that isn't common, we might need to get a master gardener that has been that's maybe a little bit more knowledgeable, but they're all going to be able to be there to offer you support, answer your questions, and their website has a lot of great information. And then, of course, the University of California Integrated Pest Management statewide website, UCIPM, is also going to be a really great resource if you can identify the plant. So if you know what the plant is, and we can type that into the search bar, the common pests of that plant are going to show up, and then you can kind of do process of elimination. It's very helpful. It's a great website if you're not familiar with it. And that's where all the master gardeners are getting their education from that program.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Do the Master Gardeners still do like house visit type things? They
I
used
think that could be individual, like someone can arrange that on an individual basis, but I think that's uh up to that person and what, if that's part of a service they provide. But no, I don't believe that that's something that is part of the Master Gardeners program.
got you. Okay. I just had a friend that went through it, and I remember her saying something about, oh, they had to do so many hours and support, blah, blah, blah,
Oh
blah.
yeah, that's for outreach events. So like
Oh,
working at the
okay.
county fair, tabling, or tabling at the farmer's market, or tabling on the Tuesdays at the
That's
garden.
Memorial?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
okay. All right.
All right.
Uh,
Well, thank you, everyone. This has been great. I appreciate everyone's questions and participation. Yeah.
Very good. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. And thank you, Suzanne. I really appreciate all of your
Oh yeah.
knowledge.
It's always fun to work with you. Thank you so much.
All righty.
Have a
Well,
great evening.
you too. Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.